So, first of all, thank you
Okay,
for being here with us. So, for those of you that
sure.
don't know Sarah, Sarah runs essentially is Madame SDV or Madame Eclipse SDV, right? Because you run and you've done a terrific job in starting and making the SDV grow incredibly fast. So, I think it's one of the most exciting working group at Eclipse as of now. And you will be
Thank you.
telling about SDV, what is happening and the role that Zeno plays in this ecosystem.
Yes, thanks a lot for the wonderful introduction.
My pleasure.
Yeah, my presentation is not going to be as technical as the other ones, so please do excuse me. But I'd like anyway to give you an overview about what our working group's doing and, of course, what Eclipse Zenoh is doing within an automotive domain. So I did prepare just a slide about myself for the people that don't know me. Yeah, I do run the working group. I'm the SDV program manager. But before that, I did study. I have a background in aerospace engineering. I did try my best doing a PhD, worked as a researcher for a bit, then decided to switch to the dark side and moved on to industry. Worked at a tier one organization for a bit and then for an engineering consulting before finally landing at Eclipse just one and a few months, years ago, but it feels like 10. So yeah, we've been quite easy. We've been quite busy. In fact, open source in the automotive industry is surging. So you probably have seen that several automotive organizations, rather independently, have started to produce their own open source manifesto. So it all started with Mercedes and then followed suit by Continental. Porsche also has an open source platform. And then last but not least, ATAS partnered with Mercedes-Benz to devise their own manifesto. So slowly but surely, the automotive industry is also getting on board on open source. So, but I usually present what are the four freedoms of open source, but I'm sure you don't need to listen to this. However, what we believe is that open source is fundamental, but it might not be enough. In fact, what we also need are two very important ingredients, which is contribution and collaboration. And what I mean by contribution is that the transfer to ensure the transfer of IP rights to a foundation, such as the Eclipse Foundation or others, to make sure that you're not working in a single vendor setting, and collaboration as well, to enable to create an ecosystem that really plays on a level playing field, and make sure that the rules are followed. And by rules, it means the governance that allows for a predictable and sustainable environment. Yeah, so what do we do at the Eclipse Foundation to support all of this? Yeah, of course, we make sure that the governance layer is in place, that we provide an open, vendor neutral, and development environment to enable this open collaboration, which usually is located on the non-differentiating layer, or what we call the collaboration layer. In fact, the organizations that are our members, but not only, they do work below their value line, above which is essentially the competitive layer where they compete with one another. We make sure that we provide them an environment where they can work together below this value line. And this is where our SDV working group is located. And in fact, our mission, which is rather broad, is to create a forum, not only for organization, but also individuals, if they are willing to build and promote open source software specification, and most importantly, open collaboration. Because what we want to create is a scalable, modular, extensible, industry-ready open source vehicle software platform. And this is a rather tough job that we set ourselves to. And in fact, we are very grateful to rely on a number of members that have been growing quite steadily in the last year or so, because the working group started in March. And we are happy to have a really great mix of members on board. In fact, not only do we have technology providers such as Microsoft, but we have the whole industry chain, meaning we have the tier 2, the tier 1s like Continental, ZF, and so on. We have the OEMs, Mercedes is on board, CARIAD, so Volkswagen, and GM. And of course, GM is the organization that is behind the U Protocol project. So they are also very much pushing for their for this technology and for open source in general. So I mentioned that what we as Eclipse Foundation do is we make sure that the governance is always followed. In fact, so what you see here at the bottom is what we always guarantee. So vendor neutrality, transparency, and openness. But on top of this, we also make sure that our working group is rather special, because differently from other initiatives, we truly are code first. So what this means is that we invest time and resources of the working group to make sure that our projects are as well known and as supported as possible. So our added value is really the fact that we have a number of open source projects, of which Eclipse Zenoh is part of, to support our vision. And we do spend a lot of time and effort in making sure that these projects work with one another and that they are as promoted as possible. And on the other hand, we also and therefore ask for active participation. So all of our members are just not putting their logo there, but they really are taking steps toward achieving our goal and the program that we have set for the working group. Yeah, so I'm gonna tell you just a brief history about the working group itself. So in the beginning of time, so all of the organizations didn't really know that open source was even an option. So they were always focusing on the dichotomy of making or buy something. And so every organization was an island. But then complexity grew too much. We are talking right now about more than 100 million lines of code for a standard car. So we're not even talking about, autonomous driving vehicles. We're just talking about standard cars. And this is a lot of code because it means a lot of money and a lot of time to develop it. So essentially, complexity is too high. Collaboration then is absolutely needed, and collaboration on non-differentiating software. And this is what our working group was born to achieve. So what we did at the beginning of the working group was to really live by the code first motto, and it means we onboarded a lot of projects that were fantastic, but they were all not matching with one another, and we ended up with what we call the SDV cake. It's not just a sucker torte, but it's a really mixed cake. So what we did was to focus on, first of all, creating a community, so that people got together and really starting to know one another. And then we also try to start the mentality shift in senior managers, because finally they are the ones that decide how to allocate the resources. And then moving on throughout the year, we started to focus on project integration. So projects are great, but they need to work with one another. So what we are doing is we are trying to create blueprints. And blueprints are solution to a set of very clear use cases. And why we are doing this is that because we are code first, we don't want to have an architecture. So we don't want to start with an architecture that we say, this is the way the working group approaches a problem. But we want to give you building blocks, and we want to tell you how to use those building blocks, which means that we start by putting together this, what we call blueprints. And I'm going to present a couple of those to you later. And we also are onboarding a quite large number of tooling projects. Yeah, so we have been starting to peek over the wall. This is October this year. So we have started to look at DevOps tools and processes. We are strongly involved in the European Union initiatives such as Federate. In fact, this is a coordination and support action that's basically It's a project of the European Union that kicked off in October, and where we are present and we are making sure that our projects are well known, are represented as much as possible, and that our community becomes the place for everything that's to do with open source software in automotive at the European level. And we've been very busy because we hosted a hackathon. We organized a full-blown SDV themed hackathon in Munich just a few weeks ago at Accenture, who was a fantastic host. And we had the chance to really bring our software with us to offer hands-on examples and hack challenges there. And going forward, we're gonna hold our community day of Q1 next year in Graz. So that's pretty much the timeline. But I said we're code first, our projects are king, so what are our projects? And what do we mean by non-differentiating software? Is this more than middleware? Is there to it more than middleware? So, I mean, yes, middleware is definitely a core section, a core fraction of what we do and where our projects are located. In fact, we have a very strong presence in middleware and framework, as well as communication protocol, but also in vehicle digital twin, and Eclipse Zenoh is clearly part of this category, together with our very exciting projects such as U Protocol, eCal, and Cuxa, who's best known for being an outer abstraction layer for VSS specification. But also, we're having vehicle digital twin that are quite mature projects as well, such as Ibeji. But we are not only there. So we are active in the runtime and orchestration block. We have right now actually two container orchestrations, BlueChi and Ankaios. And what's interesting here is that those two projects are sort of competing, but they do showcase how to work with one another within one of our blueprints. So we have a blueprint which is called software orchestration, which has the scope to showcase how can you exchange these building blocks together. So you can either choose BlueChi or Ankaios. They both are doing pretty much the same with different kind of optimizations, but they are interchangeable. And also tooling and DevOps are a really big part of what we are doing in the latest months, because what we want to offer is really a true open source experience, not only for what runs in vehicle, but for the full experience of developing applications, because this is finally our goal, to speed up the application process. And we do this by designing a entirely open source DevOps chain, starting from the design towards the development, testing and validation, the deployment, documentation we are still working on, but we are getting there. So so we want to make sure that our working group is the home where you can really speed up your development by using entirely open source. Then another very important activity is, of course, the blueprint one. In addition, we have also other things such as distribution. So Leda, for instance, is a Yocto Linux recipe, provides you with recipes to essentially have really quickly a distribution with pre-integrated projects. So back to the topic of what is non-differentiating software. So of course, a great example of it, and also where standardization is really helping, are communication protocols. So unfortunately, I missed the beginning of this presentation. I hope there was already someone talking about U Protocol much better than I can do. But of course, U Protocol is one of our main and most mature projects, with the outlook of going in series quite soon, and represents, of course, the glue that binds different communication protocols together. Is transport agnostic, is an ubiquitous language for discovery, subscription messaging, and more. And so basically apps and services can talk to one another the same language. So this is what U Protocol does. It also brings the different pieces of the puzzle together And one of the pieces of this puzzle when it comes to transport layer is, of course, Eclipse Zenoh, which, to my understanding, the integration is ongoing. So that's really interesting to see how Eclipse Zenoh is working together with U protocol as well. But I wanted to mention something about our most important activity right now, which is the blueprint one. So an example of a blueprint is the fleet management services. So the problem statement is like fleet operators, for instance, they are required by law to collect a number of data points, such as fuel consumption, mileage, and whatnot. The challenge is, as you can imagine, is how do we get this very specific data out of the vehicle and into this fleet management system? And you can imagine there are different kind of hardware, there are different kind of vehicles, different kind of fleet management system, as well as cloud provider. So the solution is, of course, to leverage open standard and technology to make sure that you can run the software on any vehicle. You are as independent as possible on any hardware, and that you can abstract and focus on APIs. So for that, we do have a blueprint, which of course has a architecture. You can check out the repository. There is code to it. There was also a number of hack challenges on this. So this is all running, and this is all entire open source. So what the scope is of this blueprint is we want to enable backend applications to consume data coming from a vehicle using the FMS API. And the data input, which you see here at the bottom, is just as an example. There could be other input, but we are here playing a CSV file through Cuxaval. So Cuxaval then passes the data over to the data broker, and you can translate the data in VSS, but then you can send this data to the FMS forwarder that writes the data over to an influx DB to the backend. So, and you can see it over here. And there is another option that you can use MQTT and pass your data over to Hono. And as an output, you can have a Grafana dashboard, for instance, and this is what you already see implemented, or the fleet management application via the FMS servers API, basically. So you can have this to outcome using Hono or programming this APIs. And here is where Zenoh, Eclipse Zenoh comes into play. And it's an addition to our blueprint, which also showcases the modularity. You see, like the difference between these two architectures are essentially the fact that there is a Zenoh router in the middle that allows you to streamline communication, to distribute the data more efficiently, and of course allows also to have protocol plugins for different protocols and databases. And the idea to have Eclipse Zenoh here in the middle is because it allows for a unified interface that you can, for you to access the VSS data that are provided by Cuxa here. So the information flow runs like this, that the Eclipse Zenoh router receives the data from the forwarder over MQTT or over Eclipse Zenoh itself, processes it, and sends that into the influx database. So there is no need for Hono, as you can see here, or for an MQTT adapter. So that's also a fantastic way to showcase what the capabilities of a historically IoT projects are whenever you put them in the context of automotive, because the boundary is here is not so clear cut anymore, right? As we are moving and evolving in the automotive domain to use more and more of critical capabilities, then we can also piggyback on what is already done in the IoT domain, and Eclipse Zenoh is a fantastic way to showcase how to do it. So we're really happy to see that guys are working together within this blueprint. And you can check out the issue here, and hopefully it will get implemented soon. And yeah, of course, when you talk about anything automotive, the first question that comes is, what about safety? So historically, there's a number of standards. There is the automotive SPICE standard, which basically tells you a collection of um, best practices that are followed. So it gives you a blueprint for a process to implement. And then there is the functional safety standard, which is the usual ISO 26262, which is a collection of guidelines to minimize the risk. So the safety standard looks at artifacts that you provide from your software. So while the SPICE is a process, the functional safety standard checks the artifacts to assess whether you are minimizing the risk or not. And then there is also the cybersecurity standard, which is again another collection of guidelines to ensure that cybersecurity is, well, the risk is as minimized as possible. Now the question is, what about open source? Yeah, and as we know, Eclipse Zenoh is a very mature project. And what we want to do within the Eclipse SDV is to make sure that we highlight which one of our projects are as mature as possible. And clearly, we are not certifying projects right now within the Eclipse Foundation, but we want to make sure that we highlight the quality of our projects, and that we design a process for them to follow to make sure that they are as easily consumable as possible, and that the integrators can see how close they are to being certifiable. So this is also an activity where we need to have volunteers, and particularly projects that are very mature, to make sure that we can showcase how good they are and how close they are to being certifiable, which we do not offer. Yeah. Well, yeah, so I just want to mention that, we are participating in this control and support action. So we are going to have a quite good overview about what projects are going to pop up in this framework that the European Union is providing as a vehicle ecosystem. We also just won the Halfor STV, which is a research and innovation action for middleware, where we make sure, of course, that our projects are known and heard. And last but not least, you might have heard that we just announced the Eclipse ThreadX project. So Eclipse ThreadX is a vendor-neutral, open source, and safety-certified real-time operating system that counts over 20 years of development and was basically donated to us by our friends at Microsoft. So we are very excited to do this, and this fits perfectly within the scope of the SDV working group to create really an end-to-end entirely open source ecosystem. So we're pretty excited about it. And yeah, this is potentially an industry game changer. Again, open source is cool. Yeah, and with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any question you might have.
Thank you, Sara. So, yeah. Question asked online because, as you know, we are being streamed on YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn. So you just have to watch out on social and answer them. Okay. Thank you very much for your presentation. Let me bring in and get prepared Nazmi from Felix, right? Which will be our next speaker. And again, thank you very much for sharing this interesting presentation with us, and all this insight about SDV, where it was, where it's going. And see you soon. Okay.